Excellent.
Welcome back to the Fierce Freedom Podcast. I'm Kat Morgan.
I'm Mark Halverson.
And today we're joined by another Michigandian. We've had a few on the podcast lately in our neighboring state of Michigan. So we have Chris McKenna here, who is the founder of Protect Young Eyes and the executive director of the Protect Young Eyes Foundation. And I'm super excited to have you on, Chris. I'm a longtime fan of you and the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah. So again, Chris, you're the founder, you're an author, leading digital safety advocate, advising legislators and emerging tech companies, featured in the Childhood 2.0 documentary, which I was just telling Mark, it's such a great resource and it's
Oh,
available,
thank
I
you.
think, via yes. And you are one of the experts featured, and it is something I would totally recommend for listeners to check out. I think it's through Bark Technology, but it's just on YouTube if people want to check that out. But yeah, so you're doing that, and you were featured on that, and you lead a team that educates parents in schools worldwide on digital safety. So I'm really excited to chat with you today. Mark, do you feel overwhelmed by, the culture of technology that we live in now? Do you ever feel
It
that
can
way?
be, sure.
Especially like you're a parent. So did this feel like overwhelming to
Yeah, I mean,
you?
my kids are 19 to 24, so at this point, you kind of
Okay.
do a lot of your groundwork and you do the best you can. But I got to say, out of the gate, I mean, I think even in talking to Chris, being this executive director of this organization, as I check your website, very impressive, very user friendly. So I'm kind of just marveling at that you were even able to carve out time to be with us because I'm sure you have a very busy and full schedule yourself.
Well, people will be listening to this at all different times, depending on when, right, it's released. You happen to catch me in a little bit of a nice time. We follow a busyness that mirrors a school and sort of ministry pattern, right? So
Mhm.
schools bring us in. We do a lot of talks, as you said, Kat, in the opening there. And those are not what schools are doing after about the first week of December because it's all about winding down toward break. Churches are winding up toward Christmas. So that's not when you're doing
Mm.
extra events or things around the church. So I find myself in this beautiful Christmas lull where I get about a month without traveling. And then starting kind of the second week of January, that'll ramp back up and we will be really busy as a team. In fact, I just had sort of a year end sort of meeting with my team to look back and how the year went. And I added it up and we did 364 presentations around
Wow.
the world as a team. So
Mm.
I have five others that do talks for parents, staff, and students. And it's a good, busy time. This is the topic. 2024 has been a huge year of momentum around all topics related to digital, whether it's the technology that's in schools or at homes or policy. And 2024 has been a huge year, fueled mostly by not only ongoing efforts from organizations like mine and others, but a lot of people listening to this maybe have heard of the book The Anxious Generation, written by
Mm.
Dr. Jonathan Haidt. And that came out in the spring, and that has created a ton of waves on this issue, really sparking some conversations, putting research to what we've kind of known as parents and as educators in our hearts for a long time, right? There was just something unsettling about putting supercomputers with 100 million choices and 100 million people
Mm.
and 100 million websites into the pockets of 13-year-olds. That was unsettling to me, right? As an adult who struggled with compulsive use of technology through pornography for years and battled and defeated that, then I watched us put that in their pockets and that just didn't feel right. So we didn't have the research, and now we do to point towards something. Not all of it is because of the little 5-inch box in our pockets, but it's impossible to say that at least a part of it isn't to blame for some of the loneliness and the disconnect and the inability to handle life's struggles because we just haven't had enough face to face and human to human. And the screen just is never a supplement for real interaction with other human beings. And I think we're seeing that. COVID taught us that, right? We were more connected than ever for 12 to 18 months, connected, right? In quotes. And yet we exited that time of isolation more lonely than ever because there's nothing in that two-dimensional realm that satisfies that flesh human to human. We are together, living life together sort of interaction that I think we're created for. So that's where we want to be, is in that space with awesome parents who Many times I've underestimated these technologies. We've been all fed the promise of advance, of better, of good. And that's $1 billion in marketing that has convinced all of us that it's advanced and it's better and it's good. And yet it has not fulfilled many of those promises. And so I think many are starting to realize that in all different layers of society, and we want to be there to help.
I think all progress is in a fallen world. I mean, if that's your faith, that idea that it's a great world, but by the way, people of faith, the Christian faith maybe would say it's fallen. And so I think while progress is great and to be celebrated, that fallenness is pretty obvious as you look at it play out with some of the technology that ties into this, right?
Yeah, I think
Definitely.
No, I was just going to say, I think there's unintended byproducts to the ease of life now, like boredom even.
Right.
You know, that's something talked about in the documentary Childhood 2.0 too.
Yeah, we need that. Our brains, I just posted, earlier this week, people could find that. Although I'm not a huge fan of social media for our young people, I do use social media for as much good as I can to inform, and we have a large following in both Facebook and on Instagram. But posting about even someone like Einstein, right? I recently finally watched Oppenheimer, the movie, with my wife,
Oh,
and
yep.
I love how they depict Einstein in that movie when Oppenheimer is meeting him sort of in various points, but at one point he's behind this sort of academic institution, and Einstein is standing there at a pond tossing rocks into the pond, arguably the most intelligent man on earth. And he found solace and
Hmm.
peace and comfort just tossing rocks into the pond. And there are stories about him. He was a sailor. He learned that as a young boy. He took time off from school. And there's that time where he, just sailing aimlessly,
Mm.
sees the curvature of the world against the horizon and starts to imagine things like E equals MC squared, right?
Hmm.
Theories that change science. It's through moments of peace where we process. It's not looking to technology to spur our thinking. It's going to us first and then coming to those conclusions and then taking them out into the world. There's a quote by Sherry Turkle. It used to be, I am, therefore I share. In other words, I know my worth, I know a thing, and I share that, and I want to share that with others. Now we flip that around. We share looking for worth. We
Mm.
share looking
Oh,
for people to
good.
affirm instead of the other way. And that seems like a small difference, yet from the human condition, I think it's a massive change in how we find worth and significance and value and formulate ideas and things. And so, yeah, there is something about, I have a friend who's a therapist, and he often jokes, and he's not really joking, but he says jokingly, it's better for your mental health to kick a rock down the road than to scroll social media.
Hmm.
Mm.
Right. So I'll joke with kids when we speak in schools, just go home and kick some rocks, and you'll feel better just being out in nature and processing your own thoughts. So
Yeah, get out in the woods, right? In fact,
get
Absolutely.
out
it's
in the
funny. I don't live
woods.
that far from Kat, and I'll be out walking my dogs, and I'll see her and her husband Zach. Either Zach's running or you guys walking many times.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you
We
guys
do
do that.
see
Yeah,
we see each other walking.
right, right.
Well, even like there's studies that show just digging your hands into the dirt is really it releases
It is.
endorphins. Like I totally agree with you, and I feel like the science is speaking pretty clearly here. So I would love to hear, Chris. You hinted a little bit at your own story, but could you share about what has made you want to become engaged on the front lines of the work that you're doing?
Right. I have no idea this is where I would be. My degree is in accounting. I was 12 years at Ernst&
Wow.
Young. I was a consultant in business risk. I was a part of kind of those early 2000 years when Enron and WorldCom were a thing and massive frauds were happening in publicly traded companies. And there was a law that was passed, and I was part of a team at Ernst& Young, a global team that helped implement some of the provisions of this law. I worked in large publicly traded companies, and I would find problems, fix problems, and keep them out of problems. Like that was my job for years, and I loved that job. And the Lord called me then into middle school ministry because they're so similar. Not at all, but I share
The
that
natural
because
the natural move.
it's a right. It's CPA to middle school pastor. They're just natural fits. One is spreadsheets, the other is what, silly string? I don't know. But the reason I'm sharing that is my mindset, both professionally and now I've carried this into a lot of work that I do now, is always through the lens of identifying and mitigating risk. We live in a world that is constantly presenting us with choices that have risk. And we, even especially, as parents too, we're always looking at things we allow our children to do and trying to prevent egregious harm by looking at risk and mitigating risk. And we want our kids to experience some challenges lest they grow up into non-resilient humans who can't face trouble. But there's a point where there's guardrails. So that's the way I see the world now. And so I joined, I went into middle school ministry, which is a radical change, but I did that from 2009 to 2016. And if you think about sort of the evolution of technology, we have the iPhone in 2007, we have the like button in 2009, we have Instagram in 2011, we have Snapchat in 2012, and we have the iPhone 5, which was sort of the first sort of mass handed out to kids smart device around that same time. So I watched us put porn into the pockets of middle schoolers, and that terrified me. So I started doing research for my families. I started a closed Facebook group called Digital Kids. I did some research about these new apps, and then in 2015 I launched protectyoungeyes.com, having no idea that I'd be doing anything more other than teaching parents about cyberbullying or about Snapchat, right? And over time, it became what it is today. After ministry, though, Kat and Mark, I spent a chunk of time at Covenant Eyes, if you're familiar with that company, an anti-pornography software company. So I left ministry, for 7 years from 2016 till just 2023. I worked full-time at Covenant Eyes. I was their digital marketing manager. So all social media, paid advertising, I had a team that did that. And Protect Young Eyes just sort of grew on the side until last year. So I'm a year into now, being called into full-time at Protect Young Eyes, leading a team and still figuring it out, right? How to turn what was the side hustle into the hustle, and leading my family here kind of along the way. But so far, so good. Like I said, the last year has been very gracious and good, and we've seen a ton of change, a ton of momentum, lots of schools and churches wanting us to come and speak. We do a lot of education. You've been to our website, which, by the way, at the time of this recording, Mark, I'm glad you've looked at it recently. It's new as of 2 weeks ago. We just relaunched it because it was needing an upgrade. So it's been a good year.
Yeah, it's very user friendly right now. So
yeah, so it gives you kind of some context as of the journey, right? So now I look at the world where we have introduced to me an unfortunate and significant amount of risk into the childhood of too many, into childhood today. And we've underestimated it. Companies have underestimated it. All layers of society, right? I talk about 5 layers of society. You have the family, you have places of worship, you have schools, and you have kind of government policy layer, and then you have businesses themselves. Businesses are the ones that are distributing the risk, and all the other 4 have underestimated it or are too darn slow or fight too much at the policy level to get anything done. So all of it's piled up against kids, and that's the problem today. We're experimenting on
for you. Great answer, fascinating. So, and there's more I'd like to dig in.
I know. I'm like, I have a question,
but I think when you put when you made the comment about maybe it was the iPhone 5, and you said about putting pornography in their pockets, and some people, I think you, based on your own personal and ministry experience, work experience, can see it that way, but as you talk about those 5 groups, I mean, a lot of folks, parents included, aren't necessarily seeing it that way. But takes me back to when my son was still in elementary school, and one of the kids had one of those phones and, was already looking at porn. And so I wondered if you could speak to that. And then I want to broaden it out because while Fierce Freedom's a anti-human trafficking education organization, why connecting porn in their pockets to the work that Fierce Freedom does? But can you just speak, first of all, to that idea about why you made that comment, porn in their pockets?
Well, I made that comment because we have, I think, lost perspective on where we started compared to where we are today. Okay, so let me give you an illustration. So when I think about where we are today, I try to use analog illustrations to help it make sense. So, for example, I hear a lot of people argue that children should have rights to social media. I just read a bunch of posts last night about this because of the ban in Australia that is now making it, they want to make it outlaw social media for anybody under age 16. There are others that are saying the rights of children should push back against that, the children should have rights. So the illustration that I used in a post on LinkedIn was, imagine for a minute that we had a history book that was used in education, right? And in that history book, this paper history book, there were addresses of pedophiles that you could write letters to. There were images of people having graphic sex there on the pictures. There were instructions for how to sextort other teens and to extract information from them. And there were all kinds of other just mature adult information about a number of different topics. But that wasn't only 10% of the book. The other 90% of the book was great for learning, great for history, and great for all the other things you want to do in education. Imagine if we found that book in children's bags. Would we ever accept using that book in schools and education? Never, never in a million years, right? We'd say that's not
That'd
good
be a
for
banned
kids.
book for a good reason.
That'd be right. For everybody would agree that that's a bad idea. And yet that is every single Chromebook that we have, quote, used for education today. Another illustration that I use that I hope gets parents to kind of realize what some of these decisions are when you compare them to kind of where we were is, like, imagine, and so I'm 50 for context, so I'm going to use some Gen X illustrations here, right back from the 80s and the 90s. So imagine like I'm getting ready to go to school and I've got a backpack. And in that backpack, I have a history book. It doesn't have the problems that I just described, but it's a history book. I've got a notebook and I've got pencils. Okay. And I'm going to walk out the door. And before I walk out the door, my mom says, wait, Chris, wait, before you go to school, I have a few more things I want to put in your backpack. Okay. And she takes my backpack, opens it up. She says, she puts in all the DVDs from the house, a DVD player, a TV, VHS, a cassette player, CD player, all my CDs, all my baseball cards, Mad Magazine, my Pokemon cards, my Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card, posters from my room, pictures of my friends, a digital camera, 5 porn magazines, and zips it up and says, Chris, here you go. Take this to school.
Dang.
You're not allowed to look at anything in the backpack that I just put in there, even though it's entertaining and engaging and your brain loves it. But you're not allowed to look at any of it. And all your friends also have a backpack full of all those same things. And their parents have different rules. So some of them have said they can, but you can't look at any of the things in their backpack either. And if I catch any wind of the fact that you've looked at the things in your backpack or you've looked at any of theirs things, you are grounded for a month. Have a great day at school.
That's such a good picture.
That is exactly
yes.
what it is to hand a child a smartphone today. We expect our children to exert a level of self-control every single day that we never had as children. And then we get upset when they get it wrong.
So true.
And neurologically, those who are upset as parents, would have gotten it wrong. I sometimes will joke in front of a crowd of parents that some of you, if Snapchat existed when you were in school, some of you'd be in prison right now. So let's have some empathy for where our kids are today. So when you kind of look at that progression and you look at that, where we are today and the choices we're making for childhood today, they make no sense. Why? Because they make no sense. And sometimes you have to snap yourself out of this slow fade to gray, this slow progression toward acceptance that happens one little micro choice at a time until you're in a spot you never would choose to be in if you were presented with that choice from the start. And I feel like that's where we are with parents and digital choices, where we have faded over the past 15 years, one little yes, one little advance, one little app, one little website at a time to a spot where if you are presented with TikTok, ChatGPT, deepfakes, sextortion, if you were presented with those options for your child 15 years ago in the device that you say is for protection and safety, you'd go, heck no, I'd never give my kid that if those were the risks. So a long-winded answer to your question, but I think those illustrations sometimes wake us up to the realities of where we are today.
Could I just, I thank you. That's a really powerful picture. And I did kind of want to touch too on the fact that you talked about seeing this through the eyes of risk. And I think, I don't know if you'd want to comment on this, but just the the fact that there is a lot of like we as human beings we want to be problem solvers and that's how we grow. And I think that can you share maybe about how the fact that phones and having access to information, as you mentioned, ChatGPT and all of that, and maybe parents that are really worried about their child's like physical safety, but not really, but kind of looking the other way, right? So kids are looking for healthy risk, like that helps us grow. But really what's happening is they're engaging in really risky behavior, but it's online and there is no feeling of like there is a consequence here. So like, do you know what I'm saying? Like I think healthy risk is a good thing, like healthy, it leads to healthy growth. And we all seek that out. But I think that it's because there is boredom, because there's all these problems that are being solved for kids by their parents or by their phone. It's actually, I think, leading to more risk online. Does that make sense?
It is, and that's the thesis, Kat, that Jonathan Haidt puts forward very
Mm,
succinctly. He says we have overprotected children in the physical world where they need more
mhm,
unsupervised rough and tumble play. And we've underprotected them in the digital world where developmentally, emotionally, neurologically, they are not ready for, and these are my editorial additions, for the dopamine monster that has been built to take as much time and attention as possible. Why? Because these are profit driven motives that you can't really even blame them for. I can blame them for some of the features they've built, but at the end of the day, they're built on a business model that profits from our time and attention. So they're going to take as much of it as possible. And our children are in a unique developmental phase where they are vulnerable to those dopamine driven rewards. Children developmentally from ages kind of 8 to 16 have high social sensitivity. That's that limbic system part of our brain that is on fire for relationship and connection and meaning, asking the very important question of, am I loved? That's what we ask as teenagers. That's why we look for friendships. That's why we draw away from our parents and toward our friends and look for tribes of other humans our age to group up with, because that part of our brain is what's developing. Everything about social media is a limbic system response because it preys on that answer of am I loved through false worth of likes and comments and noticing and popularity, right? This is why teenagers jump off of things that we only take pictures of because they want to be noticed. They want to take risks because to them, that is a part of that limbic system response to life. And we love that about teenagers, their curiosity, the way they explore, the way they just run after the world. And yet that is exactly what is weaponized by social media's features. So, yes, they are particularly vulnerable during this time. Does every child who uses social media run into these, issues that I'm talking about, Kat? No, they don't. But I would argue that almost all of them are a slightly diminished version of their full self
mm,
from something that only profits from taking from humans, whether you are 4, 14, or 40. I would argue that they are a slightly diminished version of themselves in ordinary ways, like slightly more tension at home, slightly more anxiety about what I see in pictures of other people, slightly more feelings of feeling left out because I know everybody's business all the time. These less remarkable, diminished versions of kids, I think, go totally unnoticed. And maybe don't show up in the form of my kid's addicted to porn or my kid gets sextorted or my kid is kidnapped from somebody online. Okay, those are the small percentage, but those other, I call them kind of unremarkable yet important impacts on our kids, I think are what we're totally missing when we give them access to too much way too soon.
mm. It reminds me of our friend John DeMay, who's also from Michigan, and sharing about his
Yeah.
son Jordan and how he's like, if Jordan had not ended his own life, this would have fallen into like a load of case files. Like so many of these kinds of cases are happening all the time. But
Yeah.
should it have to get to that place in order for us to say enough is enough? I mean, I'm so in a way, I'm thankful that we have stories we can point to where it feels like, hey, maybe this will have as you mentioned, like more corporate accountability or enacting legislation, maybe that will help lead to that. But I think we need to be making those conscious decisions and being protecting kids like in our own, because we have decision-making power. But as you said, it is frustrating when, other parents maybe are not seeing like their kids are going to school with, as you said, that backpack full of everything. And so even if you're very protective of your child, maybe another parent is not thinking that there's any harm. And so that's what's hard. That's why it's going to take collective action to move
That's
this.
right. Yeah, that's a great phrase. That's a good Jonathan Haidt term that he uses in The Anxious Generation that I think is what is such a struggle for parents when you feel like you're the only one. No parent or child likes to feel like they're on an
Yes.
island. So,
Yeah.
Just a short follow-up on the earlier comment. I guess just thinking in terms of a spectrum from, again, that reference to the iPhone or the technology and what it represents, you have access to, all the way to, we had a school superintendent in our neck of the woods several years in prison right now for having been a trafficker. And so nobody just but I just picture the spectrum, and it's the wild, as you described it, it's the wild, wild west, unfiltered internet access, and similarly troubled waters, right? You wouldn't put your child in shark-infested waters, and yet aren't we doing that in a sense with some of the unfiltered and unprotected internet access?
yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. And right, we don't totally avoid the ocean because it has sharks, but we're aware and we take, precautions in order to avoid or, to protect ourselves from those things. And I think, from a policy perspective, or even, I think this is what makes it so difficult, Kat, to your point, is I can do everything in my power as a parent to protect my child, but because there's such a ubiquity to digital doorways that there's only so much I can control. It didn't used to be that way. Like back in the day, if you were a super strict parent, you could mostly prevent your child from harm absent them running away and wrecking the car. But I mean, it was if they were at home, they were probably going to be okay. And I think that's the challenge today with friends and even being at home, that the doorways to things that it was impossible for the three of us to get our hands on as children is possible from their bedroom now. And we have a thing in the physical world, and I think this is what's missing today, especially when it comes to how we look at policies and even in how we, I think, are missing this sort of collective responsibility as a society for children. Um, and I run into this a lot of time when I'm working on policies. I work with state and federal legislators to write laws. And of course, there's all kinds of different, you talk about a spectrum, right, that you're dealing with there when it comes to politics. And I often run into this in more libertarian sort of mindsets, but this idea that it's sort of every man for himself. We all have this sort of individual liberty, and that's what we have to focus on. And I agree with that to an extent. And technology shows where that has cracks. And I'll use the illustration of, so when it comes to swimming pools, zip lines, and things that are just naturally attractive to kids, we have the attractive nuisance doctrine, right? It's tort law here in the United States that if you have a swimming pool, you have to have a fence around it. If you have a zip line, it has to be locked down and you can't allow anybody to use it unless there's precautions around it. Water slides are the same way. They have to be kind of locked up, locked tight. And that's because we know trampolines, those kinds of things, are an attractive nuisance to children. Those are things that prey on curiosities in children different than adults. Therefore, we have to protect children from themselves. Therefore, even if you are a totally negligent parent who allows your child to wander aimlessly around the neighborhood, if you're that kind of parent and your child falls into a pool that wasn't fenced, it's always the owner of the pool's responsibility to care for that child and prevent that child. In other words, as the owner of the thing that is the attractive nuisance, you must treat every human as a potential trespasser who could get in trouble. And to me, social media is an attractive nuisance to children. Therefore, it should be controlled. We should have fences around it. And that should be the default posture of it. Why? Because it's naturally, it preys on the vulnerabilities of children. So again, I think we have models in the physical world that have always sort of made sense to us, that have worked for years. And for a lot of complicated reasons, actually, Congress is mostly to blame because of laws that were passed in 1996 and 1998 that really don't even apply anymore, but are still creating
freedom of information. Is that kind of, or?
Actually, it's CDA, what they call CDA 230, the Telecommunications Decency Act of 1996, the 26 words that built the internet, which also created an impenetrable shield of immunity for organizations like Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok, who allow others to post content no matter what that content is. You can never go after the company who built the box where that content is posted because of CDA 230. So Congress is actually partially to blame for where we are today because they have built an island of safety for every company.
Can't that be undone?
That sounds so nice, doesn't it?
Well, I was just going to say, imagine a president who used policies that worked in 1996, or something equitable to that. It's like the world has changed so much. That shouldn't any longer be the precedent that we fall under. And I was going to ask you, because I know there's COSA and there's some other bills that are in place, but yeah, what would you want to see happen now to update these?
Well, yeah. So, we have the largest companies on earth now that have ever existed that are going to do everything they can to prevent giving back the freedoms that they have been, the immunity that they have been given. Over $90 million was spent in lobbying against COSA, and they were successful. Representative Johnson is not going to bring it to a vote, even though it passed the Senate 91-3. This is an egregious decision by him. As a man who, at least in words, says is a follower of Jesus Christ, I cannot fathom why he has made the decision that he has made. So we have obstacles in front of us that have never existed when it comes to changing these kinds of laws. We now live in a time where the very organizations that we're trying to change are the ones that also control the narrative. They control the search results. They control what gets talked about. I guarantee that my content on Instagram over the past month has been throttled because of the things that I say. I can see it in my numbers, right? Why? Because Meta controls the narrative. So, people can say, it's all conspiracy. You don't have any proof. You're right. I don't. I have some data, but I'm not going to put it past any of them for these things. So we're up against barriers and obstacles. That doesn't mean we don't have hope. That doesn't mean we're not going to eventually see a tipping point. I think we're getting there. I think we're getting close. It'd be interesting with the change in presidency to sort of see what happens here. But it's a complicated time to try to change anything at the federal level in this country right now. Extremely complicated. It's hard to find common ground.
So a couple of quick hitters. I mean, do you think TikTok should be banned? Because that's kind of hanging in.
Well, that's a separate. So that's not even necessarily a child safety issue. I think there are things that TikTok needs to be held accountable for in the way that it treats children. The ban is a question of national security and whether we as a country should allow an app that has significant influence over our children to be owned and controlled by somebody who doesn't necessarily love us as a country. I mean, so from that perspective, again, when you step back and look at it, I mean, imagine in the Cold War, Russia owning Time magazine, whatever was read the most, or what was it, right? Whatever it was that kids were into the most, because, if you control the youth, you kind of control the country. And those are things that have been used, in various movements over the years. And so, again, when you kind of step back and look at it, you go, boy, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense that we've allowed that app to exert that much control and yet be owned in that way in our country. Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Not to go on tangent, but I'm very struck myself, even people my age that are really disbelieving, distrusting of media outlets, which, I think be a critical thinker, but then they'll send me like a TikTok or a YouTuber and they'll say, well, look at this and treat that as law. And so I don't know if we could maybe transition here too, maybe to just talking about teaching your kids to be critical thinkers, or how could this relate, since it is so difficult. Like we have to have accountability at the federal level, but how can we enact change within our own homes, and how can we bring up kids and the next generation
Yeah,
to be counter cultural to this?
that's right. I think we start early, right? So we have a 5 habit framework, the Tech Ready Home framework. These are 5 habits that we have observed in homes that have kids who learn how to use technology in good and positive ways. This is what we teach in all of our parent presentations. We have an on-demand course. If you go to our website, as
Mm-hmm.
you referenced there, Mark, and go to parent course, you would see the 5 habits of a tech ready home. These are the things, and they all have kind of some practical things that you do, practical kind of behaviors underneath each of those. But it's model the right behaviors. That's number one. Pursue authentic connection is number two. We encourage work and play. That's number three, which that one is, covered quite a bit in Jonathan's book, but it's this idea that we need to teach our children the satisfaction of a job well done, delayed gratification, that not everything in life is a 8-second dopamine reward, and that comes from hard work, right? So that's number three. Number four is we delay addictive technologies and wait. And then number five is diligently prevent harm. And that's through hardware and software. We have 5 layers of protection. So those 5 habits are what we see working in families over and over again. Are they foolproof? No, nothing is foolproof. But are they things, going back to my risk mindset, are they things that mitigate the risk of egregious harm, mitigate the risk that your child will be one of the news stories that you read? Yes. I think that doing um, those 5 practices, if done persistently and consistently enough, will bring that risk down to an acceptable level. So those are the things we teach. That's that practical side. I know a lot of what we talked about so far is probably done more to increase the fear and trembling in parents than I typically want. I know many of you are already overwhelmed. I know that so much of the news that is out there, because news knows just like we do that we click on what is tragic, and that's what trends. And that's mostly what populates our feeds, because the algorithm works on 40-year-olds the same way that it does on 14-year-olds. So I want us to step back and approach things in step-by-step practical ways. And those are those 5 habits. And each of them has 4 little things that we hang on them, that we teach parents around what each of those look like in our home. And we just want it to be as practical as possible. So that's where I'd invite people, right, to learn more. A lot of what we do for parents, Kat, falls into 2 big buckets of community and learning, right? So learning is either, self-service on our website, on demand in the course, or in a live presentation. And then we have a private community where we do one-on-one support, tech support. Abby is in there, who works for me, and she takes care of people. And that's a private membership community that has a monthly subscription. It's $12 a month, but you get a lot for $12. You get all the help you want. Any questions, you got router questions, whatever you've got, will help you all month long. And those are the 2 sort of superpowers that we want to unlock in parents to try to get this right.
Hmm. Something you had mentioned on the Childhood 2.0 documentary was your kids should be annoyed. Like, I love that, because you're like, they should be almost annoyed with the repetition
Oh, yeah.
of some of these. Could you say what you mean with that?
Absolutely. So there are things, you know, and what I'll often say to parents, if you're listening to this and you have a biblical worldview, I'll point to Deuteronomy 6:5-9, where the Hebrews are wandering through the desert and they ask Moses, how do we teach our children about God? And God's response was, talk about me all the time.
Hmm.
When you walk, when you lie down, when you go to bed, when you get up, bind me on your arm, use me as a sign on your forehead, stuff me into the doorposts of your houses. These were God's instructions. In other words, be an algorithm for your children, a divine
Mm.
algorithm. So what I ask parents is, for the things you want your kids to know, are you more persistent and consistent than the algorithms that you have so willfully handed them? Because they are very impressionable. And so when it comes to talking to our kids about pornography, or when it comes to ensuring they know what to do when they run into something that's uncomfortable or violent or whatever it is, I want them to hear those things from us so often that they're rolling their eyes and finishing our sentences because they've heard it so often. That's what it means to
So
be
good.
an algorithm in the lives of your kids, to overrun some of the distortion that the other algorithms and messages that the other algorithms, I mean, they're called influencers for a reason, Kat. They're trying to influence our children. And
Absolutely.
I think just step back and think about that word. What influence are they,
Yeah. Yeah.
receiving? I want it to be from us. And so
Good.
that's what I mean by that line. I know that's kind of at the end of the movie. I get a little choked up. What I'll point out, you've watched it, and I didn't know this until they released the full-length documentary. But as soon as I say that in the movie, they show a picture of a young teen girl. And she's blowing out the candles on her birthday cake, and that's my daughter. So they
Hmm.
showed like, as I'm making that statement, they show this picture, this video of Lauren blowing out the candles on her 15th birthday. And I was like, oh, you stinkers. Why'd you do that? I had sent them some footage and some pictures from
Oh,
my family. And the picture right after that one is a video of my kiddos in the van as we're driving down to Florida, kind of wrestling around with each other. And so, like, right in that moment where I'm in this sort of emotional statement in the movie, then they did that. And so when I watched it for the first time, I was just a mess. It's like,
Hmm.
you guys got me. So, but that's
oh,
where it
it's so
comes from.
good. Well, and even I love that idea of like till they're annoyed and investing in them like an algorithm. And this was something that I had put in a digital safety graphic that I made. And it was like, be willing to invest in your child as much as an abuser is willing to invest in your child. So it's like, because that's what a groomer does. In a way, social media is a groomer. But just thinking about, there's people on the side of it too. We didn't even really touch on that, but it's sort of like social media is the tool and also a groomer, but there are also people involved behind it too. So just keeping that in mind, that there's a lot uh
Yeah.
cumulatively against your child, right? And so yeah,
Yeah.
investing in them so much. And I know that sounds like a lot of work, and I'm not a parent, and I get it, like, but just you pointing to modeling these behaviors and looking at your how you spend time on social media too, I think they really are going to make a huge difference.
Yeah. Good. Good. I do too.
I got a
Sorry,
couple
Mark.
questions as we wind down. I
Sorry,
guess
Mark.
uh,
Kept asking.
one is you talked about you helping out with legislation on the state level, and have you helped a couple of things here? Have you helped any legislation in Wisconsin that you've worked with? We're a neighboring state here. Anything you're aware of here in our state?
So nothing in Wisconsin yet. If you have a representative or a senator who might be open, we've got a couple of bills that are pretty easy pickings at the state level when it comes
Mm.
to
What do you think is a
holding
basic starting point for a state legislature? What's a bare minimum that
Huh.
states should have?
Safe harbor. Well, I think so.
Well, so from the things that I do, I aim for default protections. There are certain things when a device or an app knows that it's being used by a child, it should do by default. That's
Mm.
how we treat the physical world. Anytime we know children are the predominant users of something, we default that thing, bicycles, playgrounds, whatever, to the safest version of it so it does as little harm as possible to children. So one of the things that I've written with NCOSE, the National Center on Sexual
Mhm.
Exploitation, is the Safe Device for Kids Act, which is simply when the Apple ID or the Gmail account knows that it's a child based on the age that you submit with that ID, then turn on the filter. All the devices already have a filter. Just turn it on for children. That should be what they do already, right? When it knows it's being used by a child. But unfortunately, we have to legislate it. So that's just an example. We passed that law in Utah last year. We have about 10 other states that are working on it. I've just had to mute a call as I'm answering this question from a representative over in New Hampshire who wants to talk about this bill. So it's something that'll gain
Exciting.
traction next year. Yep.
Very
And
cool.
then we mentioned Australia earlier, and you said this is a tricky time to bring up anything in terms of legislation in that regard. We're transitioning a new political administration, presidential. But what about that? I mean, how do you perceive the U.S. response to what Australia is going to do with banning social media for those under 16? And are there any efforts to try to do that here? And what do you think about that effort?
Well, I think, you know, I think it's pointed in the right direction. I think there are opportunities to invite a lot of different stakeholders into that conversation. Frankly, I don't think it'll ever happen here in the United States. I don't think that I have that little faith in our Congress to get something like that passed, almost regardless of what I think about it. But my thoughts about it are, whenever in society we have identified something that is particularly violent, harmful, sexualized, right? All these boxes that social media checks in the lives of children, then we change the age. The only reason why we're even stuck with age 13 as this sort of phantom digital age of adulthood is because of that 1998 law, the other one that I refer to, the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, which was never meant to create a safe harbor for digital adulthood. It was only meant to protect young people from targeted advertising. Yet it has been misinterpreted by the courts now for 26 years
Hmm.
to apply to content and features, so that we just have this false idea that seventh graders are ready for digital spaces that were never designed for seventh graders. So do I think 13 is the right place to drop a child into Snapchat? Heck no,
Mhm.
absolutely not. When I look at just developmentally where they are, no way. Is 16 the right age? Maybe. But I think we need to have a lot of real, if parents are waiting for policy to direct their parenting, stop. This
Hmm.
has to start at home. This has to start at home. We have to be the ones. That's why we say delay is the way. It's a slow tech approach. We're
That's
not
good.
anti-technology. We are right tech at the right time. And the right time is not seventh grade.
Hmm. This is so good. So, yeah. Any other thoughts, Mark? I was going to kind of close this
Yeah,
down
my
here.
last would be that really, as this has, I really didn't know who you were until we scheduled this interview and a little bit, but I
Now
think,
you're his biggest fan, right?
yeah, well, I think of you as as a superhero. I mean, just in the sense you really present this kind of very clearly. You have some really good examples that you've thought of, and I love the story from accountant to middle school ministry to
Mm.
Covenant Eyes to again your own project has just unfolded.
Mm.
Very aware of what's going on, and so I think the superhero theme is so celebrated, but yours is a superhero story. So keep up the fight.
Well,
Mm.
thank you. I've even got music playing now in the background. My son just came home from school. So if anybody hears a music playing in the background when you listen to this podcast, it's because my 14-year-old son, Grant, who is a superhero in his own right. He's a young man with Down syndrome and is
Mm.
awesome and
Mm.
extremely energetic. He is up above my office here and 3 feet above my head, has his karaoke machine turned on
Oh
about
my
12
gosh.
at the moment. So I
Amazing.
apologize, but
Okay.
No,
that
we
is,
couldn't hear it. I kind of wish we
oh,
had,
Yeah.
but
Right.
kind of could, right? Yeah. So never a dull moment. But I think, I want
yeah.
parents to hear that I don't get this always right. I am bumbling and stumbling through the digital age. I didn't mention at the front, I've got a 13-year-old, I have twin 14-year-olds, and I have a 20-year-old daughter in college, and those three boys down in middle school, high school, figuring this out with you and, doing
Mm.
our best to help along the way. So.
Mm. Love it. So, yes, I agree. I'm so thankful for the work that you do and thank you for joining us. I would love for you to just how can people join you in this work?
Well, the website in its now current rebuilt state, I think, does a really good job of sort of walking people on a journey. Right at the front, it says start here. So that's what I want everybody to do, is to start here. And right away, you can ask yourself 10 questions about the digital wellness of your home. From there,
Mm.
if you want to plug into our course, getting into that learning, right? Or and after that, you could plug into our community, right? So those are sort of the first three steps. But from there, we have recommended. So just come to protectyoungeyes.com. You can find us at Protect Young Eyes on social media, out on YouTube. We're, active out there too, and just trying to create as much content as we can to stay up to date for parents. So
That's so good. Well, and the community aspect is so good because it is overwhelming to navigate this ever-changing digital landscape, but we're not alone. And there is community, and just reach out and do that one next thing, do that one next step. Because of trailblazers like you, there are resources out there. So thank you so much, Chris. It's just been such a pleasure to talk with you today.
Likewise, thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks,
Thank
Chris.
you.